One of the questions I normally get asked when it comes to the book of Revelation is this: do you read the book literally or figuratively? Which is a very strange question to me. And I understand it's an important debate for most people. They want to know if you read the Bible, especially the book of Revelation, is it literal or is it figurative? The problem I have with this question is we don't even know how to define the term literal. I mean, honestly, if I ask the question back, like, what do you mean by literal? There's some him-hawing around, and basically what they generally mean is on the surface. The issue is language doesn't work like this. It doesn't fit in these nice, neat little categories. Let me give you a couple of examples. If I say to you, oh man, I am on top of the world. Like, what do I mean by that literally? Like, what do I mean? Do I really believe that maybe the world is flat and I'm on the zenith point that we're going to call the top and I'm standing there? Like, am I making a geographical exclamation with that statement? No, you know what I mean. I mean, I'm ecstatic. I'm so happy. Happy is probably too small of a word, but it's at least in the right direction. I'm elated. But is it literal or is it figurative? Or is it just something that you know from our context? Or like this, man, I am on cloud 9. Like, am I literally making a statement that says we can stand on these things that we call clouds, and I'm on the 9th one? That's what I'm just trying to say. It's a location, exclamation. No, I'm describing again elation. Or you're driving me crazy. I'm not arguing that you're putting me in a vehicle and taking me a location. I'm saying you're annoying. Sorry, no offense. I mean, I don't know who you are, so hopefully we're good still. The point is, language doesn't work like this. It doesn't fit in our categories of literal versus figurative. Let me give you an example from Revelation 1:16, where it talks about the Son of Man, and it even says that the Son of Man has a sword coming out of his mouth. What do we mean by that, literal or figurative? A sword coming out of his mouth. Are we really arguing that Jesus is a circus act? That he's a sword swallower? Is that our goal? Or even, let's make it even stranger, Revelation chapter 5, whenever John is weeping, and he is longing for someone that can open up the scrolls, and the elder comes along and he says, look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and he goes and he looks and he sees a slain lamb. Who is the lamb? It's Jesus, and we're not arguing that Jesus is some four-legged cattle. It's a symbol that is bringing in all kinds of stories from the Old Testament, from the Exodus to God's redemption and atonement. Listen, language doesn't fit into boxes of literal and figurative. And so whenever I come to the book of Revelation, I frankly refuse to embrace either one of these false dichotomies. No, not literal, not figurative. When we come to Revelation, I want us to read it naturally. Not figuratively, not literally, naturally. Listen, if Revelation literally wants me to interpret it as a symbol, I need to read it as a symbol. We need to allow the text to say what it says. Bruce Metzger, a commentator on Revelation, says, John doesn't say what he means what he means. And the only way we can know this is through genre, context, so that we can read the text naturally. And when it comes to the concept of symbols, we need to understand that symbols have power. Turn with me to Revelation chapter 3, verse 12. Revelation chapter 3, verse 12. It's writing to the church of Philadelphia, the 6th out of the 7 cities of Asia Minor. And when he's coming to the end of every one of these letters, he always gives them a charge and a promise if they overcome, if they stand firm in the midst of the conflict. And in Revelation chapter 3, verse 12, he says to Philadelphia, he says, the one who is victorious, the one who overcomes, the one who conquers, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Now, if I have to read that literally, that's a weird promise. It's like, listen, Jesus, I'm all about overcoming the conflict, but I don't know that I really want to be a piece of stone for all of eternity. A pillar in the temple of my God. It gets even weirder once you turn to Revelation chapter 22, or chapter 21, verse 22. John's in the new heavens and the new earth, and he looks and he says, I did not see a temple in the city, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. Wait a minute. I thought to the Church of Philadelphia, you promised if they overcame in the new heavens and the new earth, that they would be a temple or a pillar in the temple of God. But now I get to the new heavens and new earth and there is no temple? Listen, if we allow it to be a symbol, if we allow it to be read naturally, this is what it's saying. A pillar in the temple is one of the most intimate parts of the entire structure. You start knocking down pillars, and not only does the temple become destabilized, but it could eventually collapse. And Jesus says to those that overcome, you will be an intimate piece of the structure. And then when we get to heaven and we realize that God and the Lamb are the structure itself, He's describing through the pillar symbol intimacy, not architecture. We have to read the text naturally. We have to let the symbols breathe. It's one of those things where whenever we even talk about gold on the streets of gold in heaven, I've asked people before, I'm like, hey, would you be disappointed if you went to heaven and there was no golden streets? You want to know what that symbol breathing, what it actually says? It says this: the most precious thing that you have down here on earth will only be worth the dirt, because that's how good heaven will be. Let the text breathe. Let the symbol say what it wants to say. And whenever you start to allow the symbols to take their own life, when you start reading the text naturally, you realize that symbols have power. I mean, why is it that when people across the world are protesting or are trying to express their anger towards America, why don't they just simply say, I don't like America? Why instead do they burn a flag? Because they know that symbols have power. Matter of fact, companies will spend millions of dollars developing logos because they know that symbols have power. They want to be so useful in their logos that if you just see the logo, it should conjure up what they sell, who they are, and where to go to get it. As a matter of fact, even if I just did a little experiment right here on the board, and if I just started making some symbols, some of them may not look at all like you know what it is, unless you have a different type of a context. But if I started making symbols like this, or if I started making symbols like this, or if I start making symbols like this, it might start to conjure up emotions, start to conjure up images, start to conjure up things in you because symbols have significant power. Symbols are intended to communicate what is beyond that words can communicate. How is John supposed to describe God on His throne in heaven without using any symbols? It's like one of the worst essay questions that a professor could give someone. Define God, don't use any symbols, and give 3 examples. How is that even possible? Symbols allow the language to be stretched to its breaking point. It allows John to speak the deepest truths that are beyond what even words can contain. It's kind of like giving me the challenge, listen, describe to me, Shane, how much you love your wife, but don't use symbols. My response will simply be the symbolic phrase, words fail me. There just aren't enough words. And so maybe I'll throw some sort of literal/figurative phrase in there like, I would die for her. And I mean that literally, but I also mean it figuratively because at this point I'm not given the opportunity to prove it. Symbols have power and they stretch language to its breaking point. And this is why it's significant to talk about this when it comes to Revelation. Catch this. Every color, every piece of furniture, every weather pattern, every number in the book of Revelation are symbols for something else. Every color, every piece of furniture, weather pattern, even numbers in Revelation is a symbol for something else. Like, take for example, the number 7. The number 7, very first time we see it in the Bible is in Genesis 1. God creates everything in 7 days. And in Jewish literature, the number 7 was known as a number of completion. Completion, that's how long it took God to create everything, completion. And in Revelation, we see the Lamb in chapter 5, and it says He has 7 horns on His head. If you know that horn is a symbol for power, what is that saying about the Lamb? I mean, does it surprise you with the number 7 that the seals, trumpets, and bowls, the 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls all come to the end of the world? 7 is a number of completion. And when they're reading this text, they would know it. Matter of fact, we do this with numbers too. For example, have you ever been to like a skyscraper and you're going up to the 17th floor? And you get into the elevator and you look and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14. That's usually where the next number is. And you're kind of going like, wait a minute, whoa, whoa, whoa. Do I really want to go up in a structure where the architect can't count from 1 to 15 without missing a number? I mean, that's kind of frightening. But you know, as well as I do, that in our culture, the number 13 weighs something. See, when it comes to interpreting numbers, when it comes to interpreting them in the book of Revelation, you don't measure numbers, you weigh them. They have a weight to them. Kind of like this, 9/11. No, I didn't just skip 10. In our culture, 9/11 weighs something. When you say 9/11, you conjure up moments, maybe where you were even walking whenever you experienced that day in 2001. 9/11, yes, they're numbers, but they weigh something. I learned this the hard way when I was teaching Revelation in Russia. I had this amazing interpreter. Her name was Helen, and I was so overwhelmed with how good she was. I went to this Russian guy named Alex. I said, listen, I want to do something nice for Helen. She's been amazing. And he goes, okay, well, what do you want to do? I said, let's get her 12 roses. And he was like, why would you want to do that? And I was like, because she's done a good job. He said, but in our culture, an even number of flowers means you want her to die. And I was like, oh gosh, no, get her 13. Like I wasn't trying to do that. Numbers weigh something. And it's not just in our culture, and it's not just in overseas culture, it's even in the Bible. And if you don't know the weight of the numbers in the book of Revelation, you will miss the message of the book. Literal or figurative, we need to read this naturally. So the question then becomes, how do we interpret symbols in the book of Revelation? 3 answers, all the same word, just with different emphasis. The first answer is this, lowercase c, context. The very first time you come to a symbol in the book of Revelation, what you need to do is you need to read 4 verses before and 4 verses after. You'll be amazed how often just reading 4 verses before and 4 verses after that you're able to interpret that symbol. It's like Acts chapter 7, verse 60, where the text says, if I pull it out of context, it says, and he got on his knees and he cried out to heaven, Father, do not hold this sin against them. And it says, and then he fell asleep. I mean, if you took it out of context and you tried to interpret it, you might think somebody's going to bed at night and they had a rough day with someone and they pray, God, please forgive them, and then they go to bed. But if you read 4 verses before and you read 4 verses after, you realize that the asleep is actually a symbol for the death of Stephen. As he is being stoned, like Jesus on the cross, he cries out and asks God to forgive his enemies. And it's a very appropriate metaphor for Christians because as Christians, our death is a resurrection. And when you fall asleep, there's always the expectation that you're going to wake up. When the symbol is merely read 4 verses before and after, it comes to life. So the first thing you do when you come to a symbol is just read 4 verses before, 4 verses after, lowercase c context. The second thing that you do, if that doesn't help, is that you read capital C context. This is the question that you ask here. How is the symbol used throughout the entire book? It's not hard to find. You just get a simple concordance. You can look up a concordance online. And you figure out where is the symbol used in the whole book. For example, the symbol key in Revelation. We see it in Revelation chapter 20 where this angel is coming down from heaven and he has a great chain and he's binding Satan. And it says, and he held in his hand a key. Now, if you read 4 verses before and 4 verses after, I'm telling you right now, it's not going to help you. But if you know that in Revelation chapter 1, verses 17 and 18 is the very first time the word key is used in Revelation, it's going to help you out a ton. And there you see Jesus, and John falls down. He says, I fell down as though dead. And Jesus reaches out and touches him, and he says, do not be afraid. For look, I once was dead, but now I am alive, and I live forever and ever. And I have the keys of death and Hades. See, the very first time the image key is used, It is used in the context of Jesus' sovereignty attained at the cross and the resurrection. And so when the angel in chapter 20 comes down and he has a key in his hand, it's invoking the sovereignty of Jesus attained at the cross and the resurrection. How do I know? Because the symbol for key, when the first time it is used in the book, is used in that context. And usually it'll carry the same context or the same meaning throughout the rest of the book. Finally, if these two still don't help, then you go to all capital letters context. All capital letter context. And let me tell you what this is. This is the Old Testament. Think about this statistic. In 404 verses of the book of Revelation, there are over 516 allusions to the Old Testament, by my count. That means there is over one allusion to the Old Testament in every single verse. Listen, if you don't know your Old Testaments, you're not going to know the book of Revelation. It is dripping with the Old Testament. It assumes in every verse that you know the story that's come before this story. And if you don't, you're not going to understand what the book's talking about. As a matter of fact, the reason why people get away with such ridiculous and sensational interpretations of the book of Revelation is because no one knows their Old Testament well enough to say that can't be true. We know that's not an Apache helicopter because we've read the book of Joel. We've read Amos. We know who the two witnesses are because we read Zechariah. But listen, you take the Bible out of context, you take it out of context, you take it out of context, you can make the Bible say whatever you want. But you keep it in context. And the book of Revelation will challenge you to become the people of the Word.